Okay, welcome to the council work session on what we're calling the open space text amendment. We're going to learn a little bit more about what that is. And I think we're getting kicked off here with our planning director, Todd Oklachaney.
Good afternoon, Council. Good to see you. Todd Oklachaney, Planning and Urban Design Director. So just a couple of key takeaways of why we're here today, and that is because staff has proposed zoning text amendments that mostly apply to private open space regulations and some related zoning map amendments, particularly around the River Arch District area. These draft regulations intentionally balance city goals related to housing and the environment, Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan strategy to reduce barriers to infill housing, and that this effort was a collaboration between 8 boards and commissions and city staff over a several month-long period that led to the creation of an open space task force. And we'll talk about some of the recommendations by that task force during this presentation. So you might ask the question, why should we update open space regulations? Basically, the Housing Needs Assessment, or which we all know as the Bowen Report, recommends continued re-evaluation of zoning barriers related to housing. And over the past few years, we've made a number of different zoning amendments that have removed these regulatory zoning barriers to encourage more infill housing opportunities. That Bowen Report also obviously recognizes that there is limited availability and affordability of housing. A recent White House report that was released in 2021 indicated that there is a severe housing supply shortages and increased prices. And that those two are inextricably linked. Housing production has not kept up with the increasing population growth, and that alleviating supply constraints would have a significant impact on the racial wealth gap. And that's primarily due to differences in homeownership rates historically. This recent research, again released in 2021 by the White House, indicates that if black families were as likely as white families to own a home, that median black wealth would be possibly up to $32,000 higher. And that for Hispanic families, equalizing the likelihood of owning a home would increase median Hispanic wealth by approximately $29,000. So what are some of the primary goals of our open space regulations? As I mentioned before, this is a key goal and strategy of the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, that we should continue to evaluate our zoning regulations and find opportunities for more housing. But over the course of this open space text amendment process, which we started, believe it or not, before the pandemic, we've been working on this for some time. After we spoke with the open space task force and community members, we really brought in the goals of this overall proposal, that we're trying to do a better job at balancing our infill housing and affordable housing needs, but also our environmental goals that are identified in the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan. And to be very clear, when we're talking about open space, we're actually talking about private open space. We're not talking about changing regulations for our public open space. So the zoning requirements for this text amendment provides open spaces for only private developments that differ from city parks, which are shared public property. And just so you're aware, in total, Asheville maintains about 54 public parks that provide about 9 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. And this exceeds the National Parks and Recreation Association's target for how much parks we should have per person, per capita. What is the purpose of open space in general? Open space within private developments can create comfortable, welcoming spaces that provide refuge and recreation, contemplation outdoors, and make the city more livable that we live in. Open spaces can also provide stormwater mitigation and provide other environmental benefits. And they also provide a diversity of wildlife habitat and promote an environmental ethic. So just a couple of examples of what we mean by privately developed open space, and we can kind of separate open space into 2 separate categories. We can think of open space zoning standards for private developments as providing recreational open space. So this would include programming such as physical activity related to swimming pools and playgrounds or dog park, while natural open spaces can be provided for, again, for nature. They would require minimal improvements, little to no seating, little or no unpaved areas. So all these types of open spaces on private property are very common, both that passive and recreational type open space. And we'll find that in these types of examples throughout the city. This is just a quick break before we get into the actual meat of the open space text amendment proposal, and I'll stop real quick just to see if you have any questions so far. Thank you. So I'm going to hand it over to...
Yes, Todd.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I want to ask you a question. I noticed that when you first started off there, you were talking about the advantages for Hispanic and Black homeowners if they owned homes or were able to get decent rentals. I was just wondering, is there any way that we can ensure that by actually reducing the open space, developers that actually take advantage of that actually are required in some way to give us more affordable units? Is there any criteria in there for that?
I think in general, we try to find a balance of, overall, we need housing supply,
Yeah.
period. We know that especially for lower income residents, that there's a need. We've primarily done that mainly through zoning incentives to try to incentivize developers to provide to provide more affordable housing, especially for kind of that missing middle or for single family type style of development. But we don't have any requirement today that, a single family house or maybe a duplex or a townhome, that it has to be, affordable.
Well, and that's the reason I'm concerned, because basically, if you look at a lot of the developers and what they're building, even with the 80% AMI and things of that nature, still does not actually address the actual affordable problem that the community find ourselves faced with. And in actuality, we could look up and have a lot more housing, but still, just a drop in the bucket for the actual problem that the city actually has.
Yeah, and what I'm just trying to suggest with some of the research that's been released recently, that there is a correlation between housing supply and affordability, and our population continues to grow, and therefore the need for just more housing in general. And I think some of this research is starting to suggest that just supply is just one of those metrics, but there are a lot of other metrics that we should utilize to try to address the affordability component.
Yeah, and that's what I'd like to see, if there was some kind of way that, if maybe you have some idea of any ideas that we could actually, sort of actually make it actually benefit the people that you say that you're trying to help. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we're open to always hearing suggestions about maybe additional incentives that we can provide to try to do that. Thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Videla Satvica to talk more about what we're proposing.
Thanks, Todd. So let's just dive into the meat of it. The first slide you're looking at here is to talk a little bit about the Open Space Task Force. So when this question of open space was to come to City Council, I think it was about 2 years ago now, there was a lot of concern around it, and you probably heard from lots of different members. So we decided to slow down and to create this Open Space Task Force made up of 8 different boards and commissions. We had about 2 members from each of these, and the idea was we'll get everybody together in a room to struggle and think through these issues. We decided on a consensus-based decision-making process that was a lot slower, but it forced us to work together so that the majority didn't steamroll, the minority. And I think we made some really good results because of that process. I'll highlight that 2 of these boards and commissions had enough concerns that they voted to not support the current open space text amendment that you're looking at. So big picture, what properties are required to provide open space? For residential, it's 8 or more homes that could be separate homes as part of a subdivision, or it could be 9 apartments in one building that would be required to provide that open space. For commercial projects, primarily all commercial projects have to provide open space. And we're unique in that regard because most cities in North Carolina do not require commercial projects to provide open space. Before we go through the details, we wanted to show you a summary chart to just kind of orient you a little bit to get a sense of where we're going and what the percentages and the requirements are. So on the far left, you have the topic. So let's look at the first one, residential. Under the current regulations, a project has to provide 500 square feet of open space per residential unit that's provided, or 15% of a parcel, and whichever is greater. It turns out that this is one of the clauses that is most restrictive for open space in Asheville. And what we're proposing on the right is a tiered system that benefits the smallest projects that tend to be on the smallest parcels. And the idea is that there are many different things happening on small parcels. They have to typically provide parking, we have tree canopy preservation, we have landscaping requirements, so we're trying to be flexible. For subdivisions, what you can see is that we're moving from 20% open space to a little bit less. Some of the idea there is that in a subdivision, you have parcels of land that are created into homes, and you have a front and backyard, which is kind of open space. So there's some rationale in reducing that open space because you have some of your own open space anyway. For commercial developments, we're keeping the lowest limit the same, and the higher limit we're suggesting to move down. For stormwater, we have a new and creative clause here that will incentivize large sites over an acre to have to provide stormwater controls. So this is using open space regulations sort of as a creative tool to get better stormwater. For affordable housing, what we're saying really is just that if you're an affordable housing project, you don't need to meet these higher stormwater standards that we are now proposing to implement, because we want to balance this need for affordable housing that Councilmember Kilgore brought up. And the fee in lieu is proposed to be the same. Okay, so let's get into it. Yeah, go.
Can I ask you on that last side, stormwater? So I get what all these other projects are, residential, subdivisions, commercial, affordable housing. When you say stormwater, do you mean if someone's building a residential subdivision or commercial development, what the stormwater requirements are?
Yes, and admittedly, it's a little confusing because you would think that somehow by providing stormwater, you have to provide open space. What we're trying to say here is that typically, stormwater today under the current regulations are not a factor in open space.
You can't overlap the meeting that, I mean, because there are stormwater requirements. I mean, there are requirements around managing your surface water associated with a project. I mean,
That's right.
So to say that there's no requirement that.
Okay, I see what you're saying. You're right, that may be misleading. There are plenty of stormwater requirements under the current regulations. But related specifically to open space, there is no either incentive or language that would affect how stormwater is implemented. Stormwater is managed by the Stormwater Code. What we're suggesting here, and we'll get into this more specifically toward the end, is that through the open space, we're proposing to use the open space as a way to get more stormwater controls that we currently are not able to get through the Stormwater Code. All right? Okay, so first of all, starting with residential, this is a chart that shows different cities along the bottom, with blue showing the low open space requirements and red showing the high requirements. So every city has different standards, and they vary. And what you can see on the far right is that Asheville's high requirements are off the charts. So currently our open space standards, and you don't hear about this in the press, are a significant obstacle to infill housing. There was a book written recently by the founder who coined the missing middle housing movement that is about trying to better accommodate infill development through small buildings that we would have seen historically that we have sort of moved away from. And without getting into missing middle housing, I just want to highlight this in that in this literature, they're pointing to open space, these private open space regulations that we're discussing as a remnant of a suburban type of development that is outdated and in a hindrance to most cities' goals. So here's a specific project to really bring it in home. This is a building that has 20 units. This is just north of downtown on East Chestnut off of Merriman. My family lived in there for a year. And this was built before the open space regulations were put into place. But if we look at the site and think, how would today's regulations work or play out in this scenario, this is what we get. On the left, the image shows what the current open space regulations would require in the shading. That entire 77% that's orange would have to be set aside for open space. So obviously incredibly prohibitive. And on the right is the amount of open space that we are proposing through this amendment that would vary between 10 and 15%. And there's a range that I'll get into later, but it basically has to do with the quality of open space. So if you make better open space, we're saying you don't have to provide as much. But the difference is important here. And I'll highlight that this is the key reason that we're trying to make such what appears to be such a drastic reduction is because the current ordinance is severely broken and undermining infill development. So we're trying to put it back into balance with other cities and other sort of industry norms. Here's a different example. This is looking at a site from the bird's eye view, plan view. And on the far left, oh yes, sorry.
Attempting to ask you a question.
Sorry,
Okay,
sorry,
she's on.
Vidila.
Right.
Technology. Did you find any cities that had more open space requirements than Asheville?
No, certainly not when you look at the heights of, or the high limits that our standards lead to. Some of this is hard to understand in digging through other cities' codes, but we are
It's not
exceptional in
apples
this way.
to apples, exactly.
It is definitely not apples to apples, yeah.
Also, I'd just like to ask you a question. Would that be because of our terrain and here, because it's a little different than maybe Greenville or some of the other areas, then that would also a factor in, because to me, that's a very large difference in the open space in the other areas. So would you say that's a big factor?
Well, I would say terrain plays a significant factor. What you would expect, though, from a code that responds to terrain is more flexibility because we have so many more constraints here. And what we have inherited is a code that is severely more challenging than what we have in cities that are flat. So I think there wasn't enough legwork or analysis or something to really understand how the code that we have inherited would affect infill development. All right, so this is another example. This is a proposal that has come to the city and it hasn't been adopted. But what you see on the left is the blue boxes are two 11-unit buildings. So you can imagine these as 4-story structures with 11 housing units in each one. And under the current regulations, basically almost half of the entire parcel would have to be used for open space. And you can see the parking spaces there would have to be given up. In this part of the city, we actually don't require off-street parking, so they could have moved forward with a project like this. But most developers and property owners want to accommodate that because it's a real need.
Also, they can't get funding. They can't get a loan from the bank without it.
Good point. You may not have any financing if you don't provide these essentials, right? So under the proposed ordinance, depending on the quality of open space, you have to provide 10 to 15%, which allows you to have the parking and allows you to have the building units. Now, the next slide, I want to clarify that both these images, what we're looking at is this consideration of what happens if we don't make any changes to the open space standards. So on the left, these, you can think of this as two options for the property owner. On the left, on the bottom, you can see it says option 1, sacrifice parking. You could potentially say, let's say we don't need financing. We're going to build this project. We're going to make 11 units in each structure, and we're going to not worry about the parking because it's not required in the city. That's a possibility for them. On the right is another option. They could, instead of making 11 units in each building, only build 4. So they're the same 4-story structures, but instead of 3 or 4 units in each floor, it's 1 unit per floor. And that allows them to reduce the total number of units in order to get the reduced open space. So they can get their parking, they can get their financing, and the result is not more open space. The result is fewer housing units, more expensive housing units. And I'll highlight, I don't mean to say that this project hasn't been adopted. They've sort of moved away, and we don't know what's coming here, but from what I hear is it's going to be very few units because of the barriers to infill. So I think we have 2 more slides before a question break. This is now looking at residential subdivisions. Under today's code, we require 20% open space, and this image shows what we get a lot of the time. What you see is the open space is provided in 2 separate chunks that sort of take advantage of the parts of the land that are less accessible for development. They're on steeper slopes or on a ravine, and not great for actually providing open space. So what we are suggesting is that the open space has a minimum of 40 feet along road frontage. So that if you're in the housing subdivision, it's clear kind of where the little open space begins and ends. And recently we have been discussing a possibility that is, instead of providing open space for subdivisions, to allow a project to choose instead to increase their total tree canopy preservation. So the idea here is that a developer could choose to provide open space in a subdivision, or instead to increase their overall tree canopy and to not provide the open space and just to provide more trees. That seems to be something that the community here is interested in because it's more tree canopy, and I think there's a general understanding that we don't need to provide open space in a subdivision like we might in an apartment building where people don't have access to open space. Here, you've got your backyard, you can go and have your grill out or whatever. So I'll pause for questions.
I have a question. We don't see subdivision applications at a council level often at all, if at all. Do you see a lot of demand for subdivision construction still within the city limits? These single-family home lots like this?
We do. Not a lot of them, but I'd say every year we get 2 or 3, maybe. I don't know if Ben knows off the top of his head because he sees us coming through more, but we still get them.
More than that. They're saying more than that.
More than that?
And do you, I noticed, I was in Charleston, not in the city of Charleston, but another city adjacent to Charleston, since they don't have involuntary annexation, they just have a million cities. We don't anymore either, but they have clearly an ordinance that requires the preservation of live oaks, or did at some point in the development of subdivision. I mean, it's kind of fascinating. You'll see these enormous live oaks in the front yard, and I don't know how the construction doesn't manage to kill them, but I mean, and I'm not sure how they do it, if they incentivize it or if they just mandate it. Have you guys looked at any, and we don't have a live, quite the same, I know there's a concerted effort to preserve live oaks in the low country, but have you all looked at any samples of cities where they have a mandatory tree preservation rule in place for subdivision development?
Well, I'll say that the current tree preservation ordinance is applied to our even subdivisions, but as you all know, the tree preservation ordinance allows you to take everything down and to replant. I believe there are conversations right now with the Urban Forestry Commission to update the tree preservation ordinance and to try to figure out a way to preserve certain specimen trees. That's all I know about that.
I'd be interested just knowing more information about that. And I know that it's been kind of a delicate dance in North Carolina because every once in a while the legislature pops up a bill that would make it impossible to regulate it at all. So I recognize that's a sensitive issue on a state level, but it'd be interesting to me just to see what that looks like. And then, you know, would that be going in the wrong direction in terms of encouraging home development? I mean, obviously that would be a factor too, maybe prohibited.
Well, I'll just follow up quickly to say that I'll mention it toward the end of this conversation, a very exciting development from this that will be incredibly better for trees in Asheville if it moves forward. So stay tuned for that, but that's coming out of the Open Space Task Force, and it's at the end of this presentation.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
I have a question, a few questions. Number one, how do we arrive at the area median income that's included in this?
We discussed the recommendations with the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and since they're sort of the nuts and bolts of affordable housing and recommendations, we use their guidance, and those are the numbers that we used.
Because I'm thinking about what my colleague said, and it seems like we're not coming to the negotiation table with what we need. The two committees that I am aware of that proposed that we not approve this as proposed were the Urban Forestry Commission and the Neighborhood Advisory Committee. The Neighborhood Advisory Committee, among the conversations that they had were concerns around gentrification and especially of legacy neighborhoods. So I'm curious of the timing on this. If we're gonna have a conversation in our retreat about whether or not we're looking at a community benefits table for housing development, should we consider this alongside it? What is the impact? And could we consider property that we know that was taken during urban renewal and redlining and any adjacent properties and exempt, so we don't cause unnecessary, unintended harm?
Well, what I would say, I guess there's a lot in that question, that a key component of this recommendation is to reduce open space regulations because we believe that they are broken. And they don't allow the city to build, for developers to complete the infill housing that we need. So if this moves forward, this would support a greater number of housing units in Asheville. And some of those would be apartments that typically are less expensive and more affordable. So I think that would be going in the right.
Development that could still happen if we made exemption.
Can you say that again?
The only thing that would be getting in the way is our making an exemption. So really, I think my question here is around timing. Why not wait until we look at community benefits tables?
Well, that's, ultimately it's up to the council. One perspective would be that since this ordinance was put into place over 20 years ago, we've been undermining infill housing. We can continue to leave the current ordinance in place that continues to do that. A counterpoint would be that by instituting this, you are already moving in a direction to allow for more infill housing, some of which would be affordable, and at the same time, you could work on these other regulations that you're thinking about.
And if I could add also that, Ms. Roney, in terms of the timing of the benefits table for our entire zoning ordinance, or for multifamily, or for
No,
whatever?
it was what I talked about earlier today, and what I heard from council members is exploring using a community benefits table for apartment developers, similar to the one we adopted for hotel, but not in the creation of an overlay district.
I guess I would just say that from a staff resource perspective, Todd, I'll defer to you, I guess in terms of timing.
Sure.
And what's gonna
Yeah,
come first?
I could definitely speak a little bit to, last year, I think it was late summer, early fall, we did hold some initial focus group meetings, some smaller focus group meetings with some developers and designers to get a sense of asking questions. What if we expand the public benefits system outside of hotels to other districts in the city? And one of those suggestions that came out from that is, well, maybe we just look at our form-based code districts where we have a form-based code that says what we want the projects to look like from a built environment physical perspective. And then what type of benefits should we think about? Should they be the same as the hotel projects, or should we have other benefits that would also enhance other neighborhood amenities? Since that time, we haven't picked it back up. It's been kind of put candidly on the back burner, but we do want to take a look at that again. From a staff resource perspective, I think it's something we could look at this year, but we are working on some other council priorities right now. The other point I would just make for looking at expanding public benefits would apply to just larger projects. So it would apply to projects that you would normally see in front of council as a conditional zoning. So the public benefits incentivized approach would not apply to these smaller, missing middle type housing developments where you have like just 1 unit or 15 units. It would only apply to those larger projects.
Because those are already by right.
Yes.
Those are already by right. It would address the conditional zoning.
Right. That said, how many, do we have an idea of what percentage of the open space proposal acreage is identified as urban renewal property? What is the overlap?
Most of the urban renewal property is publicly owned, but have we inventory? So you're saying this does not apply to publicly owned property at all? The changes to the ordinance you explained applies to privately owned property, private development?
That's right. There is a related rezoning that we're suggesting of 2 city-owned properties. But those aside, yes.
Maybe we ought to plow through the rest of your presentation, because I
Mhm.
feel like we're moving
Okay.
into the rest of your material. But hold on, okay.
I just had a couple questions. Were you not done, Ms. Roney? I'm sorry.
No, Gwen also had.
Okay, go ahead, Gwen.
Just real
Maybe
quick.
what we need is like a way to signal a line, or I want to talk. Okay.
Just quickly, this alternate to increase total tree canopy preservation, are we just suggesting that's only going to be for residential subdivisions, or is that alternative available for other projects?
We were suggesting just for residential subdivisions.
Okay, so the red light means we're queuing up. Okay, got it. First of all, Vizilla, thank you. I know you've been working on this for, is it 2 or 3 years? And Todd and the department, I know it's been a long thing. I don't want us to stall anymore. I'm in support of moving forward as far as speaking to other initiatives that may come to surface. But I do want to say a couple things. So this starts with issues around affordable housing and needed housing supply. And generally speaking, you mentioned supply as an issue, but also overregulation is an issue when trying to create more supply. And I'm not saying we're overregulating here, but I have this growing concern that we are piecemeal updating our UDO to the point where it is more challenging and therefore expensive to develop, design, plan a project in this community. And my example here is that now, if you want to do a subdivision that we desperately need or an apartment complex, you now need to have a specialist on your team that you pay to figure this out. And what comes to mind is when Jeff Staudinger left the city and asked 50 people that he felt were innovators in affordable housing, what would make affordable housing happen faster in our community? And one of the things that came up that we still haven't implemented, but I still highly recommend it, is ombudsman for some of this stuff. Because I know we're understaffed. I don't know what DSD staffing is like, but when we add all this stuff, which in this case I support in this moving forward, it's just we're getting more and more complicated to follow along what all the rules are, where all the utilities overlay is. I mean, there are things out there that people don't agree on with changes to this last year and where utilities are falling and is it actually hurting canopy. So it's just getting more complicated. And I would love to hear, maybe my point here is that are we planning to update a UDO in a comprehensive way that simplifies some of this? Is there any talk of that? And would you agree that this is also becoming so complicated that we might need that?
Well, I'll say a couple things, and I'll let Todd chime in on the updates to the UDO. We are looking at this at the same time that we're looking at updates to the tree canopy preservation ordinance and the thing I was going to mention, landscaping updates, to make them agree and dovetail and align, and making sure that they make sense. So I would say that from that perspective, this is a pretty big chunk that is going to be potentially revised and made more clear and simpler. And for people who are in the development world, they kind of pick this up pretty quickly, and once the change is in place, I know you guys don't review projects, and so it's maybe particularly confusing, but I would gather that any of these changes that are implemented, they're kind of incorporated pretty quickly. Did you want to speak on the comp plan?
Sure. So, I could speak to the UDO updates. Just based on, our available staff resources and financial resources, we have been looking at this incremental, approach to updating our UDO to try to address those higher priority initiatives and recommendations from the Living Asheville plan. I think one of the most effective ways to implement a comp plan is through zoning. A comprehensive UDO overhaul could achieve many of the plan's recommendations, but it also is a significant, budgetary impact, something that would have to be considered by council through the budget process.
Thanks, and I just always want to mention it because I know it needs to happen, but I will say too, I applaud you for going to these 8 boards and commissions, and I'm daring to try strict consensus is amazing, but the fact that you got 6 supporting is great. I don't know, I'm concerned about us over-regulating constantly, and I just wanted to share that.
I think the whole planning staff's here, so if that.
Well, the problem is that.
I'm just kidding.
I mean, my inbox.
I know, I'm sorry, Will's not here yet, but yeah.
It's true, I know, staffing is hard, but this is also staffing on the other end too, and the people that want to build. But I did hear from members of the design community and professional community that have to design these projects that there were concerns. And I know you went to boards and commissions, but did we get any input from people that have to implement this and draw it?
We have. We've met with design professionals. We had some design professionals on the open space task force, so there's been a lot of involvement. And in the question of over-regulating, in some ways we could say that we've been over-regulating for a long time, and this will help us to streamline and to clarify. Okay, here we go.
Well, I was just going to respond to Ms. Turner's question about an ombudsman. And we do have an expedited review process for affordable housing. And so that serves pretty much as an ombudsman role. And I know when I was in Charlotte and involved in planning, when we would adopt new ordinances, we would invite that industry into and say, okay, here's how it goes. This is an educational session for you all to understand these changes that have been made to the zoning ordinance. And it worked effectively. The only other thing that I would add, and Badilla, you said this is not an additional regulation. We already have open space regulations. This is a modification to an existing regulation, which we think is much more appropriately linked to the vision for our community.
And that's a perfect segue to the next part that is about commercial development and how it's impacted. And in this chart on the bottom, you'll notice that there are 2 bars for Asheville. One shows Asheville today and one proposed. But the bigger thing that you'll see is that these other cities don't have open space requirements. So again, just to highlight that we're unique in that we're requiring commercial property to propose to build open space, thinking that if you're a business, you may have a restaurant and you want outdoor seating. If you're a manufacturing business, it still makes sense that you provide some outdoor space for your employees to have their lunch or something like that. Okay? So why are we proposing such a high open space for commercial property if we are trying to reduce our barriers? Well, this is a creative workaround that we are proposing for stormwater. And what we are suggesting is that if for projects that are 1 acre or larger, you need to provide 50% of your parcel as open space unless you voluntarily choose to meet the city stormwater regulations. Because in some cases, you'll see in a couple of slides, many of our large sites are not required to meet stormwater because of restrictive state statute. So what that would look like on the chart is this. You can see I've highlighted in yellow these are for parcels that are 1 acre or larger. Let's say you want to build an apartment complex. You would have to put aside 50% of your site as open space, and most people would not want to do that. So this is an incentive to allow them to choose to put in probably what we call storm tech systems, or some kind of a subsurface water capturing system that will gather the water during heavy rains and hold it there for a while and slowly release it. And that will allow them to then develop more of the property so that they can drop to the second tier, that's less than 1 acre, and have an open space requirement that's more in line with an industry standard. Because, and this is an example in West Asheville, under the current state statute, we are not allowed to make sites like this that decrease their imperviousness. So if this site was redeveloped and they put in 1 tree on one of these parking spaces, they do not have to provide any stormwater management. That's what we're going up against. And so this creative workaround is allowing us to say to properties, we're giving you a very strong incentive here to choose stormwater. Because if you don't, half of your parcel is going to have to be green open space. And this aligns with the city's comprehensive plan and its related climate resiliency assessment report that points to nuisance flooding as a problem in lots of parts of the community. So it's good to align those things.
Is nuisance flooding a term of art, like it's flooding that doesn't cause damage, or is that just something we came up with? Because I would say flooding isn't more than a nuisance.
Flooding and nuisance.
Okay, yeah, it's a term of art.
Nancy, did you want to?
So nuisance flooding is flooding that happens
Yeah.
outside of the floodplain, essentially. So it's because of undersized systems or other things, but it's typically outside the floodplain. They could overlap, but it's not caused by the big flood events.
So there's the flooding that occurs near the rivers that floods nearby property, and then there's all the rainwater that gets other people sometimes.
So a moment ago, I heard you say that if they didn't meet the stormwater incentive, they would be required to have 50%, and the words were green open space.
Well, 50% open space. The open space.
But the word green was used, so I just wanted to clarify, because a lot of the concerns are, where will our trees go if there's no place to plant a tree that will live? But I just wanted to clarify that we're talking about open space, not green open space.
Well, typically most open space is green. Sometimes it's hardscape, and we allow that in the code. So if we want to go into the details, we can. Some people want to provide a hardscape plaza that has some shrubbery around but is mostly hardscape. Lot of open space is grass. Some open space has trees in it. So it can be kind of anything in there. The idea with linking stormwater requirements to open space is that it will be assumed that a lot of that land will be collecting water. And so it's a rational connection to either require a lot of that property to absorb water through the surface, or to have them, or to give projects an alternative solution, which would be storing it through subsurface capture or something like that.
Thank you for that. So for folks who are watching from home or reviewing this meeting after, can you articulate the explicit language that we use for doing more than assuming and moving towards ensuring stormwater mitigation?
I'm not sure I understand. Can you rephrase?
So if we're just talking about, if we go back to the slide with the West Asheville property, using this, if the property was not going to do stormwater mitigation, slide 23. Boom.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So now we're talking about assuming that it would be green space. What could we be looking for to ensuring beyond just assuming that it will be stormwater mitigation, green space, trees? Like, this is the concern that I'm hearing from the Urban Forestry Commission, from the Neighborhood Advisory Committee. If we step away from open space, we won't be ensuring green, and we lose our leverage, our chip in the leverage of negotiations.
Well, I guess one thing I'll highlight is that the goal is to encourage properties to integrate stormwater. If they choose.
You
to-
keep saying stormwater. You mean integrate stormwater mitigation measures, right? That's what you
Yes,
mean. So
yes,
that's gonna
that's
be
much
like
better language.
retention ponds, that's gonna be so that right now, this property just gets to let all the water slough off into the stormwater system. But we have examples of stormwater mitigation measures that the city has built associated with the Rad Tip project, which are very visible now down. Those are the kinds of things you're talking about.
Exactly, that's well said. I should have said that. Stormwater mitigation techniques. So our goal is really to get people to integrate those mitigation techniques into a project. So if you want, we could develop more clarification for the probably very unlikely scenario that someone will choose instead to allow 50% of their property to be open space. But we could do that. Okay. So you've seen a range. We've been talking about open space in a lot of these proposals ranging from 5 to 10%, 10, 15%. And what I said earlier was that it would be based upon the quality of open space. So this is the bit of information that you needed to know to clarify that. We are proposing an incentive for good design. And what it says is that your open space, total open space may be reduced by 5% if all of these conditions are met. Basically, most of your open space is one area. It's kind of has a regular shape. It's mostly flat, and you provide seating. And the idea is that we'll get spaces that are more like this, that actually allow for sociability and community. You can see still there are plenty of opportunities for trees and lots of green. In some instances, you'll have hardscape, so it really depends on the design and the intent, but while allowing for flexibility. So now, a couple last slides on commercial property. Under the current standards for commercial property, we allow the low amount as 5% and up to 15%. Under the current regulations, you're allowed 5% open space if you make an urban sort of style of development. In this case, this is not urban, this is very suburban, so they would be required to do the 15%. But under the proposed, if we assume that this project voluntarily complies with these stormwater control measures that we've been discussing, they would be able to have between 5 and 10% open space. So it's a reduction, but still going to be a lot more than most cities in North Carolina require. Any questions? Okay. I will turn it back over to Todd. Thank you.
We're in the home stretch. I just wanted to kind of highlight, again, the great work by the Open Space Task Force. Again, having 8 boards and commissions with different viewpoints, I think has made the overall product and the code that we're suggesting stronger. I think that we're doing a better job at balancing housing with our open space and climate-related goals that we have. Some of the things I would just highlight on this slide, as a result of the Open Space Task Force, that we are expanding the number of zoning districts where open space would be required. So under our proposal, we're actually would now require open space to be in industrial zoning districts where that is not allowed today. In the River Arts District, we have a district called the RAD OSP. It's an open space district. We really have nothing like that anywhere else in the city. That's really adjacent to the French Broad River, mainly publicly owned land, except for one privately owned parcel. And what we're suggesting is strengthening the open space standards in that RAD OSP, that RAD open space zoning district, where we would significantly reduce building coverage from about 80% to about 7%. And the reason for that is because it's publicly owned, we have recreational goals in that area. Even by allowing 7% building coverage would still allow us to build a public facility if we needed to someday and meet other kind of city needs. But we wanted to really ensure that we're preserving, majority of that open space, which is mainly in floodplain areas adjacent to the French Broad River. And another kind of main change that we made, again, as an outcome of the task force, is we're now saying that a property line buffer open spaces would now require pedestrian enhancements. And what that means is we are allowing a property line buffer, so that's between your property line and maybe the building, and we're saying that that could count towards your open space, but only if that area has pedestrian access, so we're making it more accessible for use, and it has a grade less than 15% within that buffer. So only if it's an accessible, usable open space within a property line buffer would we allow it to count toward your open space requirements. Otherwise, if they don't meet those two criteria, a property line buffer, that area could not count toward open space. Finally, again, you've seen this summary before. I won't go through this in detail. We can leave this up for conversation if you'd like, to show the current versus the proposed standards. And then finally, next steps. Staff does plan on going back to the Planning and Economic Development Committee. That could happen in May or June or even earlier, depending upon some of the feedback that we get from you all tonight. Planning and Zoning Commission, tentative hearing in July, and then City Council public hearing sometime during the summer. And thank you, and happy again to answer any questions that you have.
Hey, Todd, on the, I'm reading, we're getting some emails about the open space requirements, and they're all, kind of robo emails are all the same, except we got an interesting email from someone who's I think studying at NC State College of Design, and one of the comments she makes is, why would you consider reducing the amount of open space required if a developer voluntarily elects to meet stormwater requirements? If the stormwater measures are required, then any development must meet those requirements. What that tells me is we got a little confusion in our messaging around stormwater. I think, Vidila, we talked a little bit about that earlier in your presentation, that yes, there are stormwater requirements and those still have to be met. What you're trying to say is we're preempted by the state in some of these certain circumstances around stormwater requirements, so our only tool is to incentivize in those situations. Maybe if we can just clarify some of that, because if someone who's getting their degree is confused by what, it looks like we're going from a requirement to optional and / incentive, that I get. We need to try, we're always dealing with trying to clear up some confusion, but.
We could definitely clarify messaging on, on our website and in, further presentations that we give. And, one thing to keep in mind with the stormwater management and enhancing the infrastructure for that, there's two ways of looking at that, and Nancy's definitely the expert on this, but it's water quality and quantity. So the quantity is the speed of runoff. And the site example we gave earlier is a site on Patton Avenue. Patton Avenue, as we all know, has a lot of stormwater issues. So we're trying to encourage better, management of stormwater on private development, which would improve the water quality as well as how quickly that sheet flow runs off into the roadway. Yeah.
Let me add one thing too, specifically to this, because it's confusing, and I'm not sure if my answer will clarify it because it's so confusing. But we had to create some language in here to make it clear that if we are allowing certain projects that are currently not required to provide stormwater,
Because we're preempted from requiring
because
them.
we're preempted from requiring it, we had to include language that would also allow projects that are required to provide stormwater, that same reduction from 50% open space. So what we said is a project you can reduce your stormwater if a project voluntarily elects to meet the stormwater requirements because they're not required to, or if they are required to meet the same requirements pursuant to the code. So this can be spun in a way that makes it sound like we're benefiting projects that are required to meet stormwater to reduce their open space, and that's not what is happening. It's sort of a requirement to make it a level playing field for all similar sized projects. I didn't think it would.
Read that.
I wanted to clarify one thing briefly too, and again, trying to balance these housing and environmental goals. So we did start this at a time when the tree canopy preservation ordinance was being worked on. We slowed it down, and one of the reasons we wanted to slow this project down was to ensure that the new tree canopy standards were in effect. And we've had a lot of conversations with folks about how this might impact that other ordinance, and we don't believe this would have any impact. This does not override, the open space proposal does not override the tree canopy preservation ordinance. That those tree canopy, enhancing the amount of tree canopy would still occur. That these changes would not impact that ordinance at all.
And if I can add, sorry, one thing that I actually forgot to mention that I was really excited to talk about, that is important moving forward. This last bullet here in the key decisions that the Open Space Task Force made, one of them was that in lieu of requiring open space downtown, there was a struggle in the commission, in this task force. It was decided that instead of requiring open space downtown, we could better improve our tree planting standards citywide. And so that's something that may be coming at the same time when you review this, or it may be coming subsequent to it. But it's looking like we have a subcommittee to this task force that is working on this, and it will significantly improve all tree and landscaping standards citywide.
I think it would be probably important to bring those together for those who have concerns about changes to the open space requirements, to see those other enhancements sort of coupled with these changes, brought together at the same time. I'm just thinking.
We could do that, and that some have mentioned that same point. It could be a lot of information, is my one counter thought, but we could be prepared to do that if that's our direction.
Okay, any other questions? Have we reached the conclusion, I think, at least with the slides? All right, so.
I'll just go ahead and just say explicitly that 80% AMI, it seems, once again, that we're not going to get to our goals if we're leaving it that high. I'd like to see something closer to 60.
Any other questions or comments before we conclude today's work session? Okay, so today, just like with any work session, we don't take public comment, but we will have plenty of opportunities for that, or additional opportunities, considering this has been worked on for quite some time, when it goes to PED, P&Z, and eventually to council. So with that, we are adjourned from the work session.